The Puritans started to arrive in New England between 1620 and 1640, settling mainly around Massachusetts Bay, then spreading out across New England. The Puritans were a Protestant group from England who wanted to purify the Church of England. They had strict beliefs. They followed the Bible and took it literally. They incorporated it into every bit of their lives. They believed salvation was already determined, that God would protect them if they followed religious laws. Salem Village, currently Danvers, and Salem Town, currently Salem, were two separate towns. The residents had a tense relationship. There were many land disputes and religious disputes. The two towns were both Puritans, but Salem Village wanted their own congregation. In 1692, in Salem Village, Abigail Williams, 11, and her cousin Betty Paris, 8, along with their friends, played with the Venus glass and an egg. This consisted of the girls cracking an egg and putting the egg white into the water. The girls would then interpret the shapes and patterns to try and tell the future, usually about their future husband. Abigail and Betty lived in the home of Reverend Samuel Paris with his two slaves, Tituba and John Indian. Abigail and Betty began acting very strange. They would have outbursts and go into fits, screaming and throwing things around the room. Their bodies would contort, and they made strange sounds. Their eyes would roll in the back of their heads, and their mouths would hang open. The girls said it felt as if somebody was pinching or pricking their bodies, but nobody was in sight. A doctor was called for, but he could not find anything physically wrong with the two girls. But in the 17th century, there's not much a doctor could do or find. Soon, more girls in the village began behaving the same way, throwing fits and acting strange. Then, Dr. William Griggs suspected witchcraft. While Reverend Lawson was speaking at the meeting house, the girls from the town had outbursts. The girls were confronted, and eventually 3 names were given after Reverend Paris asked, "Who torments you?" Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba were all now accused of being witches. Sarah Good was in poverty and had to beg from door to door for food all around Salem. Sarah Osborne was not poor, but she was sick and had not been to church in years. Tituba was Reverend Paris's slave, and it's believed she had spoken to the girls about voodoo and witchcraft before the trials. She was born possibly in Barbados and was married to John Indian. The women were interrogated for days until March 7th, 1692. Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba were all sent to Boston to be jailed and await trial. Tituba confessed under duress to making a witch cake after Reverend Paris beat her. She also confessed to speaking with the devil and that the devil had told her to hurt the children in Salem Village. But she denied being a witch at first. She told stories about visions of black dogs, talking cats, and a man in black. She claimed to have seen the devil's book and accused Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne of the same crimes. Her confessions sent the surrounding area into hysteria. Everyone's worst fears had come true in their minds. The devil was among them. Her confessions also gave credibility to the other accusers. Tituba was imprisoned and later released after the trials. She was given to a new master after Reverend Paris refused to pay her jail fees. Sarah Good denied being a witch and proclaimed her innocence throughout her trial, which began on March 25th, 1692. When Sarah was brought into court, her accusers began to rock back and forth and moan. During the trial, one accuser began convulsing and claimed Sarah had attacked her with a knife and showed a broken piece of the knife. But a man who was in attendance stood up and claimed it was his knife and it had broke the day before. He then showed the other half of the knife and claimed the girl had seen him break the knife. Tituba claimed a man dressed in black told the three women to sign their names in the devil's book. Good and Osborne signed, then forced her to sign as well. She claimed there were more names in the book, but she could not read them. Sarah Good claimed Tituba and Sarah Osborne were the real witches, but she was convicted of witchcraft and sentenced to death on July 19, 1692. She gave birth in jail, but the child died. She was hanged with 4 other women. Sarah Osborne did not confess or accuse anyone else of being a witch. Before her case could go to trial, Sarah Osborne fell ill in prison. Conditions in jail were very bad. It was overcrowded. There was not enough food, and it was bitterly cold. On May 10, 1692, Sarah Osborne died in prison. She was not formally tried. Other women were accused of witchcraft after Tituba's confession. Salem town, Salem village, and the surrounding area was sent into a panic. The devout Puritans now feared the devil was among them. Martha Corey, Dorothy Good, Rebecca Nurse, and Rachel Clinton were all accused of witchcraft next. Martha Corey was a coveted member of the church in Salem Village. So was Rebecca Nurse in Salem Town. Martha did not believe in witchcraft and denounced the witch trials. After this, Ann Putnam Jr. and Mercy Lewis accused her of witchcraft. She proclaimed her innocence and figured she would be exonerated. Martha was level-headed during her trial and tried to convince the judge not to believe the young girl's lies. The girls began to move the same as Martha, mimicking her movements. Mercy Lewis claimed a man was whispering into Martha's ear during the trial. Ann Putnam Jr. said a yellow bird was sucking on Martha's hand. Martha Corey was convicted. She was hanged on September 22, 1692. Dorothy Good, daughter of William Good and Sarah Good, was the youngest person accused of witchcraft. She was just 4 years old. She confessed to being a witch and claimed she had seen her mother talking with the devil. Mary Walcott and Ann Putnam Jr. accused the young child and claimed she bit their arms just like an animal. She claimed her mother gave her a snake that talked to her and drank her blood. Officials believed the snake was the child's familiar, a spiritual guardian that would protect a witch. She was in jail from March 24th to December 10th, 1692. She was released on bond and was never tried. Edward and John Putnam accused Rebecca Nurse. She was arrested at 71 years old. It's reported that after she found out that she had been accused as being a witch, she said, "I am innocent as the child unborn, but unsurely what sin hath God found out in me unrepented of, that he should lay such an affliction on me in my old age." Sarah Holton believed Rebecca placed a curse on her husband after some of Sarah's pigs got out onto Rebecca's property. Sarah claimed she cursed her husband. He started convulsing the following night and died a few weeks later. Magistrates John Hawthorne and John Corwin said of Rebecca, "It is a sad thing to see church members accused." Members in the community testified on her behalf. Some of the accusers again went into fits during the trial and claimed Rebecca was causing it. The jury came back not guilty. But after some of the community were outraged and after the accusers' fits started up again, the jury was allowed to deliberate for a second time to decide Rebecca's fate. The jury changed their verdict and sentenced Rebecca Nurse to death on July 19, 1692. Rachel Chilton was accused of being a witch in Ipswich. Accusers claimed she could shapeshift into a dog and a turtle, and of harming livestock and children with her witchcraft. Rachel Chilton was not convicted. She died in 1694 or 5. Sarah Cloyce and Elizabeth Proctor were arrested in April. They were brought before John Hawthorne and John Corwin to be examined for markings or birthmarks. It was believed they were caused from the devil drinking their blood. Elizabeth's husband, John Proctor, was arrested during the examination. Sarah was a covenanted church member. Her sister was Rebecca Nurse, who we already covered. A number of people accused Sarah of witchcraft, including Abigail Williams, Mary Walcott, and John Indian. She was arrested after a public interrogation. She proclaimed her innocence. Her other sister, Mary Easty, was also arrested and executed. Sarah survived until the trial was over, and a new superior court was instructed to disregard all spectral evidence or testimony of the afflicted. Her charges were dismissed. She was the only surviving sister. On May 27, 1692, William Phips ordered that the court be established to handle the witch trials, the Court of Oyer and Terminer. 62 people had been imprisoned for being a witch when this court was started. John Proctor, the husband of Elizabeth, was accused by Abigail Williams, Mary Walcott, and his former servant, Mary Warren. Proctor challenged the veracity of spectral evidence and the validity of the court. 32 neighbors took to John's side, but the damage was already done. While in jail, the sheriff seized all of their belongings. Their cattle were sold off, slaughtered, or shipped to the West Indies. The beer at their tavern was taken. Their children were left with nothing. John and his wife were tried and sentenced to death by hanging. Giles Corey was arrested April 18th. His wife was Martha Corey, who we already covered. He had believed at first that she was a witch until he was also accused. Giles denied the accusations, but refused to plead whether he was guilty or not guilty. He was put in jail until he went to court, where again he refused to plead. The law stated that a person who refused to plead could not be tried. To keep Giles from avoiding justice, he was punished by receiving hard and forceful punishment. He was stripped naked, boards were laid on his chest, then rocks were placed on top of the boards. Sheriff George Corwin gave out the punishment. He sat there for 2 days with the weight pressing down on his chest, but he did not yell or cry out for mercy. After the 2 days had passed, the sheriff asked Giles how he pleaded. Instead of answering, he simply said, "More weight." The sheriff added more rocks on top of Giles, or he would stand on top of the rocks himself. He would ask him how he pleaded. Giles said, "More weight," every time in protest to the court. The words, "more weight" or "more rocks" were recorded as his last words. He died from being crushed by the weight of the rocks. Since he did not plea, he kept his estate, and it was passed down in his will. George Burroughs was a former minister of Salem Village, but the community had withheld his wages. He had to borrow money from John Putnam to pay his debts. He did not receive his pay, so he could not pay John Putnam back, and he was taken to court over this, but he won the case and eventually paid back the money after receiving his wages. He left Salem in 1683, moving to Maine, where he survived multiple Indian attacks. He was brought back to Salem and charged for witchcraft by his former congregation, some who were even involved in suing him years earlier. During his investigation, no witch's mark, also known as witch's teat, were found on his body. He was found guilty in his trial because of his unbelievable strength. Also, the fact that he did not baptize his children was used against him. He was also suspected of killing his former wives with witchcraft. He was sentenced to hang. The victims were likely tied to a ladder or makeshift scaffolding. A rope would be placed around their neck, and the ladder would be pushed away, causing them to hang until death. Their neck did not break. While George was waiting to be hung, he began reciting the Lord's Prayer. He recited it word for word, perfectly. The court believed a witch could not do this, and Cotton Mather, who was in attendance, wrote this as well. The crowd went wild over this and tried to stop the hanging, but Cotton Mather convinced them that he had been convicted and he was a witch. The ladder was pushed over, and George hung from the neck until he died. As the trials went on, more and more people became skeptical about spectral evidence. Eventually, the Massachusetts governor, William Phips, whose own wife had been accused, had ordered the court of Oyer and Terminer to be dissolved and replaced. Spectral evidence was now not allowed, but more people were convicted after the court was changed. But the governor issued pardons. They would not hang. More were found not guilty, but had to pay their jail fees to be set free. While in jail, the accused had to pay for their stay, along with their food and bedding. The last trial was held in May of 1693. On August 25, 1706, Ann Putnam Jr. asked for forgiveness. She claimed that she had not acted out of malice, but had been deluded by Satan into denouncing innocent people. In 1711, the accused and their families would receive some compensation. 578 euros and 12 shillings was authorized to be divided among the survivors and relatives of those accused. In the early 1700s, a number of victims had their judgments reversed. During the Salem witch trials, over 200 people were accused of practicing witchcraft. 30 people were found guilty, and 20 were executed. 14 women and 5 men were hanged, and 1 man was crushed to death. Several people also died in jail awaiting trial due to the harsh conditions. Over time, the trials were viewed as a dark chapter in history and about the dangers of mass hysteria and injustice. There were so many victims involved in the Salem witch trials, and many stories from the accused and accusers. Most of the accusers had prior confrontation with the accused. It terrified the community and affected not only the accused but their families and changed their lives forever. I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I've been fascinated with this story ever since I visited Salem as a kid. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next. Peace.